Wargaming have introduced the heaviest Leopard yet, and it is of course the new premium tank, the Leopard 2 AV, and today's video is looking at this heavy Leopard variant, and of course it is on the Cold War game mode, and this one is a review that I was a little bit hesitant to do because this tank ultimately is a heavy that is supposed to rival things like the FV4211, which is the dominant heavy tank of Cold War era 2, and therefore I think that this has got to be compared in some ways to that tank in order to kind of gauge whether or not you should purchase this tank and whether or not this tank is able to perform, which I can already tell you this tank can perform, but in this video we're detailing exactly how. Now there are two replays in today's video which we will be covering, and it's going to showcase a fairly new map or reintroduced map, Great Wall. Now this is a map that is available to World War II and Cold War, as anyone who's been playing World of Tanks within the last month will of course know. But the key thing about this map with the Cold War tanks is that you do have to be somewhat aggressive, and you're going to see a little bit of an aggressive gameplay here. Now, talking about aggressing, trying to ram up the backside of a T-72 is, yeah, it's a little bit of fun, but probably not ideal in terms of trying not to take out the majority of your hit points. This tank is not as heavy as maybe you might think comparatively to some of the Russian tanks, so don't go ramming them all of the time. However, if you come up against medium tanks in this tank, because of the speed limit that this tank can offer, you can actually ram opponents very nicely, and I mean really quite nicely. I rammed a medium tank earlier for about 1,000 damage, which of course when you're in Cold War might not sound as much, but obviously on World War II that would be loads. But the key thing being with this tank is that you have armour that a lot of the other Leopards just don't. But the thing is that you sacrifice a few things in order to actually get that armour model. I guess with that we'll start off with the main sacrifice, and that is of course the gun of this tank. And effectively what happens is that you have so low penetration comparatively to a lot of the other tanks within Cold War, and that means that if you do spend the 10,000 gold, I can imagine that you're feeling a little bit let down by the tank actually not being able to perform against some of the other heavies of which it's supposed to be fighting. And because this is a heavy, it doesn't take a brain box to work out that you should be fighting other heavies or being in close quarter engagements. But when you have such low penetration, it doesn't actually leave you much opportunity when you're playing against those heavies to be able to be versatile and be able to not have to get round the side of them or the back side of them to be able to pen them. And the problem with the FV4211, which is your main opponent as we talked about earlier, is actually that frontally the FV4211 is pretty disgusting to come up against, and actually 90% of the time you probably won't pen, and if it's showing you any of the side armour it can be even worse because of the space that you get on the side, which can be a pain to go through. Trust me, going through the side armour of the FV4211 with this tank in particular is painful. And even going through the front of that lower plate can be a little bit painful as well because of the angling of that lower plate. Now, am I saying that you will never be able to pen and that if you aim 100% correctly, but it doesn't leave much leeway with this. So that's something I want to highlight to you guys, and in my personal opinion the improvements from your armor model comparatively to the negatives that the gun kind of offers, yeah, I just don't think that they're quite right, and I don't think that Wargaming got it entirely right with the gun statistics that this vehicle offers, because yeah, it's just nowhere near the level at which you'd be able to reliably pen or be able to do much. And you can see here when we come looking down onto the upper plate of the FV4211, the sheer actual number value of the penetration is just so low you can't even go through the unangled upper plate of the FV4211, which, and even the side, like you're seeing, like these shots should be penetrating. They're not particularly like the hardest of shots to hit, And you can see here kind of us going into the FV4211. We can guarantee at least some damage by going into him. But what you're seeing here is us just trying to hit that upper plate, looking down into it. And one thing that you can note with this tank is it's actually pretty good when you get like face hugging, because you have very nice kind of gun depression. You also have the ability to kind of push out damage pretty nicely too. And therefore, I guess that this tank is okay, but I'm certainly not going to be dousing it with being a super overpowered Cold War tank, because it just isn't, and that would be a complete lie. However, what we do manage to do is be pretty consistent. You're able to probably, if you're an average to kind of experienced player on modder tanks, you're probably able to average about 4,500 damage per game roughly, if you play it to a decent degree. And you can see here, if you have a decent game, you can pick up 5,000 damage, a little bit of assistance. The view range of the tank, if you put on coated optics, is nice as well. And so I guess it can be played well, but the key thing being is that the tank itself is not necessarily the easiest to play. Now then, we jump into the second replay of today. We're kicking it off quite quickly, and of course we are with a platoon with Ricky Tikitave, and of course if you haven't watched him, he is a British content creator for World of Tanks as well. So it's both of us here on Cold War. We jumped in for one game and we had a pretty decent one. Of course, that's why it's on YouTube. So the key thing with this kind of gameplay and this kind of review is that I'm trying to be super honest with you. And of course, if you are thinking about spending money on this tank, it's kind of one of those things where I wouldn't really recommend it. And if you are interested in playing the Cold War game mode and picking up a premium tank, there are better options. There's the Leopard VT2, which in my personal opinion is a way better version of the Leopard 2 AV, just because this tank, it's trying to be that versatile heavy, but just doesn't quite get it in terms of the penetration and also the gun handling. And yeah, in general, you're probably not going to be able to do what you would like to do. However, in this replay, what you're seeing is when this tank can kind of work on the aggressor, because this tank is a little bit better when you get into mid-range engagement. So I'm not talking super close range. We already said that this tank is not particularly amazing at those close quarter encounters where you really have to kind of hit the weak points of tanks, because you're kind of limited by what you can actually aim for. So it's okay in face-hugging scenarios, not that great in scenarios where you have to kind of be, you know, within 100 meters. It's kind of that mid-range engagement where maybe you're 150 meters away. And albeit it does have decent accuracy, so at long ranges, if you can get free shots into people, take them. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't be shooting at things like the Conqueror who's out in the open, but you definitely shouldn't be thinking that this tank is going to do you any favours when you're coming up against those FV4211s, which I really hoped it would, because ultimately something needs to counter that tank within Cold War. Is it as broken or overpowered as it once was when it was first released? Probably not, because there are a few more competitors, but it still probably is the top dog for the Cold War game mode. So what you're seeing here is a pretty slow start to the game. It's been 2 minutes, but the key thing about Cold War is it can all swap so quickly within this. And you can go from having no damage all the way up to like 5k, 6k, 10k even, if you have an outstanding round. Now, what you're seeing here is just a little bit of kind of waiting around to see what's happening. I don't want to be too aggressive, because ultimately, if I get YOLO'd, you lose a lot of your hit points. You don't tend to bounce all too much with this tank, and that kind of leads me into the point where the armor model, albeit is okay, it doesn't bounce as much as maybe you'd hope to, and I guess that that's something else that the FV4211 has over this tank, and it really is becoming a kind of a little bit of a joke, to be honest, when you compare this tank comparatively to said FV4211. So you would expect that you'd be able to pen them in the side, which you can do if you aim properly and if you aren't hitting this kind of upper plate, but there we go, we're able to hit him again. Now this is a rare occasion where you can actually pen the FV, but you can see it's all orange. There is no red indicator to let you know that you can pen easily, so there is a chance that you bounce, and you're seeing the bounces do happen. It's not one of those rare occasions, and that's really where I hate coming up against the FV. You can't snapshots on the Cold War game mode with this tank as much as you can with some of the others that have super high penetration, albeit you can blind fire, and you're about to see some blind fires coming in against whatever is over there. And I guess whatever is over there is a Conqueror that we spotted at the beginning of this game. So we're able to kind of push out a bit of damage onto people that just have no idea that you can shoot across here, but we'll do it anyway. And now it's time to advance at least a little bit. So yeah, I think in general my opinion of this tank is that it is okay, but I definitely don't think you should be rushing out, getting out your Visa or your credit card or whatever you might have to purchase this tank, because yeah, it's pretty expensive as well, costing you about £35 if you want to buy it in the game. And yeah, I'd rather spend the like £20 to be able to pick up the Leopard VT2, which is the better version in my opinion of this tank. It offers the same sort of turret armour, it doesn't have as good hull armour, but it has a way better main armament, and it was also able to do a lot more. It's more versatile, feels more flexible, and yeah, we'll probably end up having better results than this thing will. So that's kind of my rundown of this tank. Of course, you can still have good games like you're seeing here. Picking up 5k damage is not terrible. It's nothing probably too amazing for you guys to probably see if you play Cold War for any length of time, but you're certainly having to utilise some of these heat rounds. But remember, Cold War heat rounds are pretty terrible, because if you come up against any spaced armour, heat is terrible against spaced armour, and therefore you don't ever really pen with it. So it's just a case of like joke after joke with this tank in terms of just being able to pen things. And albeit we do try and ram the Centurion, we don't manage to pen. There's a little joke as well against the T72 AV, which is probably the better version of this tank, to be honest, as well. And so there you go, picking up 5,600 damage. It's nothing terrible, I'm never going to sneeze at it, but it certainly feels like you could definitely do with just that little bit extra pen to guarantee that you will be able to deal more damage than what you can see here, and be able to be the one that comes top of the team every game, and carry a little bit more, albeit that this tank can still do that, but yeah, a lot harder. And you'll be seeing leopards that aren't the heavy versions coming a little bit higher. Of course, you are the heaviest leopard within World of Tanks, and yeah, it kind of lives up to that name. Heavy, sluggish, little bit mediocre in my opinion. But there we go, hopefully you did enjoy this video. And of course, Ricky Tikitave coming in for the ram to finish off the game, and yeah, a brilliant kind of round where we both did okay. And of course, hopefully you did enjoy this little review of the Leopard 2 AV. Of course, if you have played this tank, you have purchased it, let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this, whether or not it should be purchased, whether or not that this is kind of changing the Cold War meta, whether it is altering the way in which you're thinking about playing in your FE4211 or any of the other premium tanks or tanks within Cold War. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope you join me back in the next video where we look at some kind of guides coming up soon. So hope to see you there. Goodbye.